All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Filipino American Woman Project. I am your co-host, Jen Amos. And as always, I have Nani Dominguez with me. Nani, welcome back.
What's up, everyone?
Yes. And we are excited, as we always are. I've just given up on coming up with synonyms, Nani, for my excitement. And I'm just going to go with excited all the time. So maybe that's just my shtick.
It still fits. Yeah. No,
yeah.
okay.
Maybe that's just my shtick. I will stick with it. I will own it that I'm always excited because I am. Because in a time right now where it is so easy to feel isolated, it is sometimes you really have to actively take an effort to, stay in community and have a great, positive attitude and seek out help. I say all this because we have an amazing guest with us today. We have Cynthia Siadat, who is a Filipina licensed clinical social worker and mental health speaker. And we were already talking a little bit offline, even about my own depression in the recent weeks and really the first quarter of the year. And already I feel safe with her and I'm just excited to get into this conversation. So without further ado, Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with y'all.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, to our listeners, I want to let you know right now, if you want to learn more about Cynthia, pull up your Instagram account and look up Living Fully IG, and you'll be able to find Cynthia on there and just scroll through her stuff and see all the good things that she's posting about and check out her website. IamLivingFully.com. Also, if you want to engage with us, Nani and I, we do have a phone number, 415-484-8329. Feel free to text us, leave us a voice message. No one never leaves us a voice message, by the way. So if you do, I will love you. So, or not, don't do it. I don't know. I'm trying to do like reverse psychology. Like, please leave us a message, but don't.
It's okay.
But it's okay, right? So Cynthia, let's go ahead and start with just by sharing, how did you hear about our project and what compelled you to reach out and be on our show?
I was talking to a friend of mine who you had interviewed, I want to say a couple months ago, Rain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I love Rain.
Yeah, I love Rain too.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't
know you guys were connected.
Yeah, well, we connected over, I think it was just Instagram, and like just started chatting, and she was like really interacting with some of my content, and I was just really loving getting to know her.
Yeah.
And then I saw that she had interviewed with you all, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I gave a listen and I was like, oh, I really want to do this. This sounds really fun. And so, so she and I just chatted about how great it was for her to meet the two of you. And so I was,
Oh yeah. We love Rain. And shout out to Rain. She is episode 90, which was published January 22nd, 2021. Oh my gosh, her story is incredible. I mean, I'll read the title of her episode real quick. You can choose to not be in pain. Breaking toxic patterns, victim advocacy, and the glorified narrative of motherhood turned upside down with Rain. So once again, that's episode 90, which you can check out at thetifaproject.com. That episode still resonates to me till this day. So much that I think Rain and I, we're just in touch all the time. I'll just randomly send her audio messages on Instagram. I'm like, hey, I'm just thinking of you. So Rain, big shout out to you. We love you. We appreciate you. And so great to see that we have a mutual friend.
Yeah. It's so great. I was just really impressed with everything. I mean, I was listening for her story, but I was also just really excited to meet both of you. So thanks for having me again.
We're happy to have you here. We're so glad to meet you. Another one of Rain's friends. Anyone who is a friend of Rain is a friend of ours. I also have that relationship with her where we talk pretty often, and she just reaches out, or I'll reach out randomly just to say hi and check in. And I really appreciate the sisterhood that she builds around her wherever she goes, on top of having such a moving story that she shared with us in her episode 90, I think Jen said.
Yes.
So if you haven't listened to that episode already, definitely listen to it. It's one of the episodes that we got particular height of feedback on after we released that, and for good reason. So I know that Rain has also reached out and made her own connections, with my family. So she's just, she's a part of the family at this point.
Yeah, she's incredible. But let's put the focus back on you, Cynthia, because this is the Cynthia show today.
It's okay. Rain can take any kind of spotlight that she wants.
Oh, I bet you, when this comes out, Rain's going to be messaging all three of us. Thanks for mentioning me. So Rain, obviously we love you. You know that already, but it never hurts to hear it again. Yeah. Well, Cynthia, as you know, this show is called the Filipino American Woman Project. And what we have come to find in all of our conversations is people really define the Filipino American woman so differently. And in your form, you said something that really stood out to me, that you had the privilege of growing up in a predominantly Philam community. And to me, what stood out is the word privilege, because when I think about my own relationship with, like, let's say my family in the Filipino community, I tend to have a love-hate relationship with it sometimes. And so for you to say privilege, like, first of all, I love that attitude, toward the fact that you were, growing up predominantly in a Philam community. So with that said, tell us a little bit about your background and, what it means for you to be a Filipino American woman.
Sure. So yeah, I did grow up in the predominantly Filipino American community in Vallejo, California. Woo-woo. And thank you. And it was just unlike any experience that I've ever had since. And I can see, for me, being a Filipino American woman really means that when I go out into the world, like, and this is a more kind of recent realization, but also kind of not. It's a weird both thing of, like, I feel like I'm carrying our values into the work that I do or into the communities that I go into, primarily around Kapwa. Like we were talking about how I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and there are things that I've been praised for, acknowledged for, highlighted for, that I'm like, wait, isn't that just how everybody treats one another? Like you just kind of watch one another's backs. Like you just
nope.
You just do that. And, and like that, yeah, you're right. Like, that's just not, I was told a lot of things that were kind of negative about it. Like I would be told, oh, you're just being so nice. It's like too nice or too allowing, or, and I kind of took some of that in, and a little bit of that got internalized as like, oh, this is like not a good thing. Like I'm too weak or too soft or something.
Be selfish.
I should be selfish. Yeah. But it never quite sat right with me. It really it caused a lot of internal, but I like being like this. I don't like being just about me. Yeah. Now that came with its own stuff. Of just being all about everybody else. And then over here is what am I? I'm a person who's in the room. Cool. But yeah, to me, it really means carrying those lessons, the values, the ways of treating other humans into wherever I go.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I know, Nani, you mentioned Kapwa a lot in our newsletters, and it's just such an important thing for you to mention. So just curious what your thoughts are on what Cynthia said.
Yeah, I think that is everyone. If you're not familiar with the term Kapwa and what that means, you should definitely go look it up and learn about it, because I think that it's kind of like in our last episode or our last interview with Marissa Torona, and how she said, family is really integral to my experience as a Pinay. And I do carry it with me into everything that I do, whether it's the friendships that I make, the projects that I'm involved in, the work that I do, what I pursue in my professional life. Really, that family value or that cultural kind of aspect of being Pinay is what makes me so special. And being immersed in these white dominant spaces, or dominant cultures, I guess I should say, where it's really about pull up your bootstraps and go get what you want for yourself. It does cause a lot of internal friction, because you're okay, but that's not how I operate. I operate based on a collective effort. I operate based on support, leaning on and having people lean on me from my community. And that's what makes me strong and special. And just not a lot of other cultures here in the Bay, I guess, have that. And, I can speak to what you mean by having the privilege of growing up around Filipino American culture in Vallejo. When people ask me where I'm from, I say Oakland, because that's where I was born. That's where I went to school. That's where my mom lives, or has lived her whole life. But I was also raised essentially half the time by my grandparents, who both lived in Vallejo. So, yeah. So essentially I'm also as much from Vallejo as I am from Oakland. Hey, Otto.
Yeah, that was Otto.
He's special guest.
that was the laziest part. He's like on his side and he just barked. And
he's like, hey, don't forget about me.
I love it.
But yeah, it just having that split culture of my experience growing up in Oakland versus what my experience was growing up in Vallejo. In Oakland, I wasn't surrounded by a lot of other Filipinos. You know, it was just the people from my family that I knew. And when I was with my grandparents in Vallejo, it's like whether we were going to Kmart, my grandma loved Kmart and Starbucks and Food for Less and Seafood City. You know, they have a whole shopping center basically dedicated to Filipinos, which is
wild.
Which is wild because over here in Oakland, you know, if I didn't have that experience, it's like, where would I find that kind of culture to just go out in the world and go to a store that has gifts from the Philippines or just random little tchotchkes and decorations for the house and slippers and rosaries and, you know, all the random things that
all of them are
and it's like you don't really have that here in Oakland. There's Chinatown, which, you know, you can find a lot of similar stuff, but there's nothing that's really Filipino specific, and there's no hub for, I know in San Francisco it's growing, like the Soma Filipinas area is growing and becoming more known, I guess, but people from the East Bay don't typically venture off into the city that much, you know, unless they have a reason to. And so even that was kind of hidden from me for a long time until I was an adult and started to explore the area on my own. So much of what I know about being Filipino and upholding the culture and just partaking in the culture comes from my experience in Vallejo. And so I think that it has been a privilege to grow up in a space like that.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. I think I hear and have experienced myself, like, you know, sometimes our community growing up in a Filipino community can come with some pains. And I definitely have had to heal from those. But I think there was something really foundational that I got being able to be in that community. There was like just that idea of like collectivity of like, you know, everybody's kid was everybody else's kid to scold.
Right.
And like, or cheer on or take care of or feed and make sure that they're fed, you know, like it was just, is so special. And I really, I mean, I can say, you know, as probably many folks who I grew up with, maybe not, maybe just me, I won't speak for them. But I think in some ways it was such a warped way, but I think I took it for granted a bit because when I got to college, I went to UC Santa Cruz. It was a big culture shock. I was like, oh my gosh, there's white people. And I think white folks were like probably the least familiar to me. And so I was just like, oh, there's a lot going on. And I used to, I don't know, Nani, if you remember, but like in Vallejo, there's like a very specific way sometimes that young women speak. And it's like, it's a little swallowed. It's a little like S prevalent. I know that now, but I didn't know that then. And I remember going into those circles at UC Santa Cruz and having people go like, why do you talk like that? Like, what's that? But it was, I still do it to this day. Like I'm still pretty S prevalent. I've stopped the swallowing thing, but I'm really S prevalent in my talking. Anyway, but yes.
That reminds me of my sister who I remember she couldn't say her R's and exaggerated her S's. Like she would say squirrel instead of squirrel.
Squirrel.
And so she had a lot of that growing up. And I remember that. I was like, wow, she has like a lisp or something. But she grew out of it throughout the years. Obviously, like she's an adult now. And when you were talking about that very much reminded me of like what my sister used to struggle with. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And, you know, I'm glad for her that she grew out of it, you know, somehow, some way. So I appreciate hearing you both talk about just kind of your background of being raised in Filipino culture and just be heavily in that. And, you know, it does remind me of even my own upbringing of being, you know, around, I mean, in military life, when you're moving around, you're kind of just with your family. But once we settled in San Diego, I very much, you know, recall being taken care of like my relatives and, you know, while mom was working and stuff like that. And I feel like I have this constant tug of war in my head where it's like, like I want community, but I don't want the community the way that I experienced growing up, which was a lot of abuse and emotional neglect and all those things. But I think I'm mature enough now to know how to handle myself in those situations, because it's like, no matter how much I dive into, like, let's say the white culture and how much I, try to be self-sustaining, even being uprooted out here uprooted out here in Virginia. I've lived here for about like 3 years now, like to just kind of look over there at the West Coast and, let's say see Nani and her experience with her family and hearing your stories and knowing my family is there. I'm beginning to like realize just sort of like inherently I want that, like, despite how crazy it is, very crazy, traumatizing, just irritating. It's like, it's something that is just a part of me that I'm beginning to acknowledge. Like, and I've been talking about this a lot, I think throughout the past, even the recent episodes, Nani, of just my kind of feeling homesick in a way. And it's not even, it's not really physical. It's more like figurative, like just kind of having that desire to like be sick of someone right now. Like I'm sick of, I am kind of sick of someone locally right now, but that's a conversation for another time. So I guess I kind of got what I wanted, but I think just kind of that feeling of knowing that if anything were to happen, people would drop everything to be there for you, and that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately. And how do I want to figure out how to reintegrate that into my life? Because I've been so like hurt in my upbringing. At the same time, I don't want that hurt to be a reflection of, the community as a whole. Like I do believe there's good in it. Hence why we are 100 episodes into the show, because we've been able to find that in all the people we've engaged with. So I just say all this because I'm sort of living vicariously through what both of you are sharing. And it's showing me with every conversation we have on the show, like how much I inherently want that. And now I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, I know I want that, but how do I reintegrate that in a way that still honors me? Because there is that tug of war being Filipino and American, where you do value being, having that collectivist values as well as being independent. Like I very much love my independence. I'm also an introvert. So like, I like to be around people for a certain time frame before I need a recharge, So for me, that's kind of my mindset, is like, how do I find that balance? Like, how do I reintegrate that? And ultimately the desire is there. So I think I'm on that journey now of like, okay, how do I make that possible? And I think that in these conversations, I'm constantly inspired to be like, oh, if I just hear this person's story and how they did it, maybe I can apply that to myself as well.
Yes. Yeah. I totally hear you on that. I'm like listening to you and I'm like, yes, I am an introvert. Yes. Yes. I did like move super far away from my family. And then I'm like, wait, how do I get those things back? Right. It's like, wait, I want that. I totally, something, I don't know if you felt this, but, I was mentioning like when I left Vallejo and went to UC Santa Cruz, I could tell you both that, when as I look at my experience as a whole, like with my own mental health, with my own depression, I can see that time coincided with what looks like I was going through high school, went to college, and then I see this trajectory kind of downwards. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's telling. Yeah. I was like, that is telling me something really important. And I feel that like whenever I go home my parents are still in Vallejo, they have one house that's like on the east side of the town. And then another house that was like rented by my sister for a bit. And like they were renting out, but now that they're older, don't want to because it's just a lot to manage. And last time we were there, which was just a few weeks ago, me and my husband, we stayed there. And like, it was the first time like I had ever stayed anywhere else when I went to Vallejo and like visited my parents. And it just felt good. Like it felt healthier for me to get to have some separation. I mean, like as much as like and it was like a weird thing to kind of balance. It's like that Filipino American, that felt very Filipino American to me. Because like we arrived and my mom was like, oh, just stay here, just stay at my house. And my husband and I had talked beforehand, like, no matter how much she says, you're going to stay, you're going to break, do not break. And like, you both should have seen me. I was like, no, Mom, like, I am not. We are going to go to the old house. Okay.
Like I practiced this.
I practiced it.
It's like no eye contact with Mom. Mom,
no, we're not.
Don't seduce me.
You're okay. it's like, but until the moment we drove away was just like, I don't understand.
Insisting.
I don't know. Yeah. The whole time. So, and all of that in the past would have made me be like, oh, okay, Mom, like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it is that you say.
Yeah.
But it ended up being like loads healthier, and just, it's that, I've talked to other folks who I was with Reclaiming Filipinx Identity.
Mm-hmm.
Their show. With Chachi.
Yeah, we love Chachi.
Chachi. She's so great. She's so sweet.
Oh my gosh, she's so freaking sweet. She's like, she'll just say, again, so another one of my friends that I send audio messages. She's like, I'm just checking in with you. How are you? I was like, Chachi, I love you.
I just love her. She's so sweet, so insightful, so smart.
Super insightful.
Yeah.
And so like something I love about her, I'm going to go on about her. She's got this like beautiful island energy. Like she just like my family in Oahu, like she reminds me of them because they're like, well, like they're very gentle and very like go with, it's like very, it's lovely. I love speaking to Chachi. So anyway.
Yeah, we need to have her on the show. Like
I know. I was like just thinking, what happened to her? Wasn't she has sent us on the show?
Yeah, like I'm gonna have to like send her an audio message, be like, Chachi, what happened?
We were on the show together like a couple weeks ago or something, and the group of us women were talking about like going far away from our families of origin.
Yeah.
To kind of create that kind of psychological safety.
Yeah.
And that's just like, I am that person in my family. I moved the furthest away, and there were a lot of unhealthy dynamics happening. Like I felt because I tended towards the more like sensitive, I ended up feeling everything for everybody. And so it was just healthier for me to like have some space, but like, it's an interesting, I don't know. It was a really cool, that's a cool episode with Reclaiming Filipinx Identity, because there were all of us talking about how we needed to like create that space to in order to create like that kind of like objective kind of perspective of appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that. Cause I think that, and I mentioned this in a past episode where like, it's okay to leave the nest for some time. Like you're not insulting your family. If anything, you're expanding the family. You're stretching out like what we're all capable of, as a family. And so that when you do come back, it's like you have resources, like you've come back with stuff,
Yeah.
And I think it just continues to add to the family as a whole. But yeah, it is an interesting discussion of like, being like, it is good. I think it's good. It's healthy to fly away from the nest for a while. Like even for me, I'm like very much far away from the nest. And it's really given me a deeper appreciation for, a sense of family and community. And something that I've been hungry for some time. And just like how, like, I don't think I've really explained this in detail yet with our listeners, but at the last week of March, I've been telling Nani about this. At the last week of March, I completely turned off my phone for like an entire week. That's a story for another time. But I remember like how much anxiety I had, like reintegrating it back into my life. And so now having my phone a month later, and Nani has kind of seen, I think, my progress in all of this of just how I've been able to make it possible without sort of repeating like the bad habits that I had with my phone prior to turning it off for an entire week. And I think that's how I feel about family. It's like, okay, I've been far removed. Now it's just a matter of like trying to figure out how to reintegrate, family and putting myself in there. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously we're not going to have like an answer today on how to solve this, but obviously that desire is there, to want to have that family and community while still feeling like a whole person, that where we can accept ourselves and not feel like we're not enough or not be prone to, any negative triggers that may come from being around family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's really the beauty of this generation of Filipino Americans that is at least involved in this conversation here at the Tifa Project, is that whole kind of journey that we go on, individuating from our families, feeling that disconnect of straddling the hyphen between Filipino and American cultures, and then kind of exploring both, but not wanting to fully let go of or immerse yourself in either. And so yeah, boundaries, I think is the theme of today.
And hashtag boundaries.
It's just, that's something that I've talked about in the interviews with my family is like, that's just not something that we grow up doing. You know what I mean? In any aspect of our lives, it's just like, we're all up in each other's business all the time. And, we feel the need to keep our family members in check by doing those checks and balances and providing our 2 cents, even when it's not warranted. And, that can get tiring. And as you become an adult and as you begin to learn like, oh, I can make decisions for myself. I can do things without using my family as a crutch, but also like, they don't have to be there as my crutch. They can be there as a support, a system of support. And it doesn't have to be that like kind of codependent relationship where like how you were saying your mom was just insisting. And in the past you would have just been like, okay, just acquiesce to whatever she wanted. And Jen, I know that when you came a couple of years ago back to California for your like 3-week vacation, you also chose to get an Airbnb instead of stay with your mom, and you really enjoyed that. And so it's like
for an entire week, by the way.
Yeah. And so there's no reason why we can't like integrate that kind of, again, boundaries into our family relationships and really do it for the sake of having more fruitful family relationships, especially if we come from places where we have toxic dynamics with our family members or trauma from the past that we need to work through, or that we've decided that we want to work through and build those relationships back in a different capacity. So,
yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying, because I think, that visit was the first time I actually set that kind of a boundary up with, particularly with me and my mom. She and I have had more of a fraught situation between us. And so I have been attending therapy in my own journey since like, I don't know, 2006, something like that.
Wow, nice.
Kind of off and on throughout. And I know that for at least 10 years of that, my family's sentiment about it was like, oh yeah, that's something for Sin. That's something that she does. And like, she needs it. And like, or it would be like, you're still doing that? Like, why are you still going?
Wow.
But by now, like most people in my family have gone to therapy. And that is an exciting thing. And I'm really appreciative of how uncommon a thing it can be. And one of the people who went was my mom. And she and I, we used to get into like fights. Like there was like abuse stuff happening, just verbal, physical, that kind of stuff between she and I. And there was, I think it was like a year or two ago, she was like, just on the phone with me. She and I talk pretty regularly. And she was like, I learned that there are things that I do that, may be hurtful to you guys, to you and your sisters.
Wow.
To Atis. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, well, I just want to tell you that if you ever have or had something that happened between us that was hurtful, or, you still carry with you, which there was like a lot at that
point. I have a whole stash back here.
Yeah. And I was like, oh God, am I going to have this conversation with her right now?
I wasn't ready.
I'm ready for this whole thing in my closet. Like,
it's the funniest thing with this like timing, because I think it was like just a couple of weeks before that, I was in my own therapy session, kind of processing that love-hate relationship with her. It was like, I love her. I think she's like the most brilliant woman I've ever been around. And at the same time, she was real nasty with me. And I was, probably no joy in certain regards, but I certainly didn't try to make trouble. And so we had that conversation. And I remember in the middle of it, like I was just kind of, it was kind of me going down that list of this happened. This happened. And she just sat there and she listened. And I was like, I was just stunned, like, holy, she's just hearing me. And I remember thinking in the middle of it, this is like that conversation that I think folks hope we get to have with our loved ones before they go or before we go. And I was just like, this is really special. I think that this kind of work that, like you're doing and like we're doing in our therapies, that kind of stuff, I think it really can address some of these boundary issues that are it's so tough. I think with boundaries with the Filipino community, one of the things I'm working on is trying to see how, like, basically manualize how I've applied Kapwa into therapy. Mm-hmm. But like, one of the things is like, boundaries is tough to bring to our community because we have that interwoven kind of quality.
Right.
And it's like, how do you navigate having boundaries, like healthy ones?
Yeah.
But also respect this thing that we have going on. And I'm just fascinated with that. So I'm really, I don't know. I think when you brought up boundaries and our community in that way, trying to create the healthy things, that really helped me think about that in that sense.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it back to the whole notion of Kapwa and how I realized that I said, go look it up, but I didn't define it. So for anyone that is not familiar with Kapwa already, it's this idea of like a shared identity amongst our community. And as you can imagine, that doesn't leave a lot of room for boundaries. That doesn't leave a lot of room for self-exploration or self-realization or actualization. And so that is part of straddling the hyphen between being Filipino and being American. And especially with our generation, or, second, third, et cetera, generation Filipino Americans, I think that's really the friction, the internal friction that we feel, especially because there's such a difference. There's such a wide difference in the atmosphere that we have at home versus the atmosphere that we go off to college and see, or into a professional field and see, and have to learn how to, play the game. So I think it is something that is just a constant juggling act, I guess I would say. And again, if you are able to, venture off on your own and learn about what your needs are and how to honor yourself, while also coming back to rebuild those bonds with your family in a way that's like, I love you, but like from over here, you know what I mean? Like, this is my bubble and you're not allowed in my bubble. Although, you're going to be all up in it anyway. I want you to know that it's here. Those boundaries are, just, they exist basically.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. I think you getting, like, so often when I'm working with clients in general, is like, not just with my Philam clients, but just in general, is like, when we get to assert our boundary, there's something special in that, even just for us to get to say, even if somebody crosses it.
Yeah.
It's like, we still feel stronger for having said what they are. So I really appreciate that, what you're saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is such you kind of have to do it in order to understand the impact of it. And otherwise you're caught in that feedback loop of just always succumbing to your family or whoever's expectations of you, whether you're diving into, the white dominant culture in your professional life, or whether you're, just sticking to what you know and staying close to home. So it is, again, a privilege to be able to venture off on something like that and try and at least attempt to marry the two.
Yeah. I'm thinking, there's so many different interpretations. As I'm doing my research and everything, I'm finding so many different interpretations and definitions of Kapwa. And one of the ones that I found was by a writer, Eileen Tabios. She just came out with a book called Dove Lion. And it looks great. I haven't yet picked it up, but I really admire her work. And I pulled up her definition just because I thought that it kind of captures the both of I'll just read it. So it's Kapwa, a Filipino cultural concept of interconnectedness, whereby other people are not others. So that, like, I am you, you are me. We're not others, but we're part of what one is.
Amazing.
She's a poet and author and visual artist, and she's just phenomenal. I asked her, can I use that in my work? And she said yes. So thank you, Eileen.
Yes,
thank you.
Please spread that message. Yeah. No, I love that. That's beautiful. And at the same time, I think it also kind of visually illustrates how you don't have a bubble in that sense,
It's an interesting, I really feel for, our parents who, right now we're living in a time where talking about mental health and talking about our sort of inner workings is more common, where like my mom has been like anxious for years and is only now realizing like, oh, that's anxiety. It's like, oh
yeah.
Oh, that's what that is.
Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah.
I'm just so excited for just continued conversation about it, because I think it's so, the way I feel about Kapwa is if we had Kapwa in the world, we would have a lot of good happening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so that feels so good to me, to be like, okay, how do we have or let folks who are in the Filipino community, but also not in the Filipino community, experience Kapwa?
Yeah.
Like how can we do that?
And that's literally, in this moment of like political polarization and all of this, like just hate that's going around, as of the pandemic on both the Black community and the Asian American communities. I think that that's the missing piece to the puzzle, is that that feeling or that value of interconnectedness. And no matter how much we may disagree or even not like each other for whatever reasons, we still, like Jen and I were talking offline earlier, said, still have to learn how to coexist. We still have to learn how to share this space. And if we don't acknowledge that we are inevitably interconnected, whether we like it or not, then this is how it's going to continue to be. And so that is something I think really special that Filipinos have to offer the rest of the world. And another reason why I just wish that more of us would embrace our culture and want to bring it into the different spaces that we find ourselves in, rather than assimilate and minimize those parts of ourselves.
Yeah. It's like a super strength. I think of all Filipinos I've ever, like all Filipinos, I have not met one of us who hasn't had this as like this is just my foundation,
a core value.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about trying to set boundaries while being, in community with your family or have that interdependence of sorts, I think part of the fear to set boundaries is it's almost like you're facing death, like you're cutting the umbilical cord, like saying, if I set this boundary, will this mean that, am I exiling myself from my family in a way, or am I alienating myself when I set this boundary? And I think that's just something that we all are trying to figure out, trying to find that balance, and yet when we, kind of what Nani was mentioning, it's like, if we don't even try to verbalize that boundary, like we often walk away from our family feeling, I wouldn't say like a bad aftertaste, but feeling like we lost a part of ourselves, when we let people overstep our boundaries. And so, like, again, obviously this is not going to be fixed overnight, but it is an interesting discussion to bring up, because it's the issue that I think a lot of us face is like, again, how do we be in community with each other while still respecting who we are and ourselves? Like, how do we find that? So if any of our listeners have mastered this, please let us know. If you have the answers, if you've mastered, kind of finding that balance of being Filipino and American and, being in community as well as setting healthy boundaries, let us know. I'm very curious, because it's an ongoing conversation. But either way, I'm glad that we're having the conversation, because I think there's a lot of people who just sort of accept this as truth or as this way of life, or maybe stayed in a mentality of victimhood of like, well, this is, it is what it is. It's my family, like I have no choice kind of thing. And the truth is you do have a choice, but it starts with that awareness and that desire to honor yourself while being in part of the collective. And again, no overnight answer, but it's worth the conversation, and it's worth the topic. It's a topic worth contemplating about.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that you are saying that, like, it's not overnight. I think something that I found, like, I think I was mentioning earlier, like sometimes I'd enter a room before and I'd be like, oh, I'm not even really aware that I'm like a person also in the room. Yeah. I'm just kind of like there and like, okay, but I know I'm supposed to help people. I know I'm supposed to do that. I know I'm supposed to do this. But I feel like sometimes the missing piece is the individual themselves.
Yeah.
And so like the assertion, like Nani, what you're saying, and Jen, what you're saying is like, that assertion of yourself into the picture of things. I think there's something in that. And I'm not really sure. I mean, there's a lot, like I could go into that kind of like therapy stuff is just so good, because you get to, it's akin to that idea of us getting to take up space. and getting to be present and involved and invested. I think as an introvert, as the bunso, the little one, I wasn't really used to speaking up. I wasn't really used to talking about myself, or if I did, it was like discouraged.
Yeah.
And something that I've been kind of playing around with, and I really don't know if this is like the thing. So if you're listening and you try this, I want to know how it worked for you or if it didn't. But just like asserting how you're feeling, asserting what your experience is like in no relation to anybody else.
Yeah.
It's just like, sharing how I feel. It's like, I feel this, period. And seeing if it kind of puts to rest anything inside, if it kind of creates more ease. Because if it does, then and my theory with this is like, it's like after in being in a collective community, that individual identity doesn't get that nourishment. But then if we do get to say like, I ... it's like, is that helping the nourishing of that part of the collective? That part of the whole. So that's my theory, but I don't know.
No, so much about implementing boundaries is definitely about communication. And I think that that's where a lot of us get either stopped up, especially when we're the younger sibling, or if we've been, kind of the baby of the family in whatever capacity. And so you're used to, people telling you how you feel or what to do or what's expected. And so really learning to speak from a place of I, and also to honor, that I'm stealing this from Cad. He always says this in his workshops. My fiance, he teaches workshops on white supremacy. And he always says, the story belongs to the listener. I forget how it goes, but I will get it and I will insert it here later. But basically, it's not for you to insert yourself in someone else's experience. Their truth is allowed to exist no matter how it may conflict with yours. And so your only job really is to listen and to, we in our family dynamics are not used to being listened to in that way. Or listening to others.
Or listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's something that we really have to learn. And again, just speaking from a place of I rather than telling someone else about their own experience,
Yeah. Wow. I feel like we've given our listeners a lot of things to contemplate about. And actually, in both of you talking, I was just thinking about a recent journal entry I made after talking to my therapist last Monday. And I wrote this down, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but I'll explain it. So it's an I am statement. I am confident in what I want and how I share what I want. And the reason why this weighs a lot on me to actually declare that is because I'm not confident in what I want and how I share it because I'm afraid of how that's going to affect other people. I'm afraid how if I'm confident in myself, will that be at the expense of my relationships? And that's been a lot of what I've been battling with lately is like, again, this whole conversation is very therapeutic for me right now because it's like, that's the battle that I feel like I'm facing right now. And I think a lot of us tend to face. And so if anyone needs an I am statement, here it is. I'm going to say it again. I am confident. I am confident in what I want and how I share what I want. And I think I'm going to add something else, like despite what other people say. But again, I don't know. I'm going to leave it there for now. Anyway, I feel like we covered a lot. That was such a heavy needed topic. And I want to continue forward here and get to some of the other questions that we have. But so Cynthia, before we transition over to life today, tell me a little bit about the fact that you are a granddaughter to Philippine revolutionaries. I think this would be so worth sharing with our listeners.
Yeah. I am so proud of this. So my grandfather, his name is Tomas Calma, and he was a commander in the Hukbalahat in the Philippines. And I learned he and my grandmother, Maria Virginia Calma, they were both leader figures alongside Luis Turuk. Luis Turuk is considered, for those who don't know, Luis Turuk was credited for some of that revolution action in the Philippines that liberated Manila during the Philippine-American War and from Japan. And Luis was married to my grandfather's sister, Gregoria Calma. And And these are all things like I've learned in like the last 4 to 5 years. So my mom was adopted by her aunt, who was also my grandfather's sister, because my mom and her biological sister, who was a baby at the time, were with grandma. Mm-hmm. And both grandma and grandpa, the theory right now is that both of them had a bounty on their heads because the government was really, just trying to get rid of the leadership from the Hukbalahap.
Yeah.
And so the theory is that my mom went to live with her aunt so that she was safe. And so my grandmother and my other aunt were safe. Mm-hmm. That's how much we think happened. It's still not very clear.
Yeah.
But on Death March, my grandfather helped his platoon escape from the Death March. And that's one of the stories that my cousin was recently telling me that our family is super proud of. And so like it is so my family, when I was growing up, it was just the 5 of us, the immediate family. And most of our extended family was elsewhere. They were like in Hawaii or in the Philippines or other parts of the States. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this, like, we didn't understand. And my mom's own experience had like the trauma that she had to deal with was that separation. So like talking about it was really painful for her. So she didn't really want to talk anything about it.
Of course.
So the ways that I had found out about my grandfather was like Googling him. And I looked him up and I was like, oh my God, you look exactly like my mom.
Wow, I love it.
And like I immediately like picked up the books that he was written about in, and then picked up another book about the Amazons of the Hook Rebellion because my grandmother was featured in them.
Oh my gosh. You need to give us a list of these.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So email me afterward.
I will.
Okay. Add this to the show notes. This is important.
Yeah. Ate Vina Lansona at University of Hawaii, Manoa, I think. Mm-hmm. She was the one who did all the interviews, like the one with my grandmother. And I have it in my to-do list to go to the Philippines and go to the archives and get to listen to her voice because I never met her before. Wow. And so I'm also trying to learn Tagalog so I understand what she's saying because all of it is in Tagalog. So, but yeah, so Ate Vina Lansona, I think is her last name. So yeah, I feel really proud. I think an interesting thing that happened as I've been learning about them both is that I've also experienced, and this is consistent with some research done about like just identity and mental health, but like I've experienced like an increase in my self-esteem because I know who's the giant's shoulders I stand on now. Yeah. It's like, oh, and this is just like this one generation back or a couple generations back. And so I don't know like the rest of that, but knowing that had really given me, it's so new. I haven't yet gotten words to describe it, but it feels super solid. Yeah. I think it came after a time where I had experienced kind of the more kind of frail part of my self identity that I had formed over the years kind of collapsed. And then I figured out like, oh, okay, I need to like stop doing what I'm doing. I'm like doing way too much. I was working like full-time 60 hours a week. And then on the weekends, I had an organization I was running. Like, it was just
oh my goodness,
a lot. So like, I just like collapsed and I was like, oh, well, that was easy. Like that just like, but then I'm finding that with this as my core, with this as my foundation, I feel much stronger and less like, there's like less anxiety about it. Like I'm not finding myself like pushing myself to the degrees I used to, which is interesting because that's just new.
Yeah, because it's like as you start to know where you come from, maybe there's this less anxiety to maybe have to prove or establish yourself because you know what came before you. Cynthia, I appreciate you sharing that because I think part of our anxiety, a lot of us come from this need to feel like because, and this goes back to my feeling of feeling uprooted, is like, I too don't know a lot about my history. And what I've come to learn in our conversations throughout, the show is that, our parents, our grandparents, they don't want to share it because it is a traumatic experience for them. It's like, as much as we want to like beg them to tell their story, you're almost like, pressuring them to open up old wounds, And so when I started to have that realization, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm just going to have to like work my way around my family, just like how you had to Google.
I had to Google, read. I'm like, I've got these books and they're just like all highlighted up just in the sections where my family is.
Yeah.
It's just like, I found their names and I was like, okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's and like you said, it sounds like there's good mental health benefits to actually learning about your family history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are. I remember when I was first entering into the field, I was working in San Francisco at a foster youth agency that was like doing wraparound services when a kid was going from group home to foster home or just stepping down.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things I learned there was that when I'm working with a young person of color, one of the ways that I can like really help foster their self-esteem was to have them getting familiar with their culture of origin. Mm-hmm. So I remember working with a young man of Haitian descent. And we were just like going through, the history and like the colors of the flag and like just like the base things that he and I could find, just looking it up. And they did become part of his identity. I mean, I remember not shortly after, it was like he was wearing shirts in this like very baby blue color and like baby blue and white and like just and then eventually like a head wrap that was the flag itself. And I was nice. That is so awesome, and I didn't understand it at the time of how deeply that must have been feeding a part of himself, because I was still really new in the field. But looking back on it now, I'm like, yeah, there's like a lot going on psychologically. Like he's getting his self affirmed. He's developing a sense of identity that is his own. It's like his own, but also connected to this larger whole. And I've been doing some reading recently about loneliness because I read about super light topics a lot.
Sounds like it. It's like how I like read a book on depression because I was like, I need to figure this out. Like, it's my leisurely reading is learning about depression. I hear you. What? Yeah, I hear you.
But I was reading about, there were 3 different types of loneliness that they spoke of. And one of them was like the individual sense of loneliness, that like identity is like, where do I even belong here? There's a social loneliness of like being with other people, but like feeling pretty isolated.
Oh yeah.
And then there was collective identity. And that's just like, I am a part of, this group. And that's like why folks join like bowling clubs or like teams or, associations of sorts, because they can belong to this larger thing than themselves. And I'm just fascinated by that. And this is all like rough draft of me working on Kapwa therapy, but like, it's like it coincides so much with this idea of like, we want a sense of our identity that ties back to a larger whole, so that we're not like the ownership is collective, but the assertion of it can be individualized. It's like, well, I believe this because like, I believe in social justice. My grandfather was like a fighter for social justice. And I realized that it is a privilege of mine to get to have Googled and then found my grandparents. Like that is a true privilege. I really appreciate that. That's as what's that called? That's exceptional. It feels not usual to me. I don't know, maybe it is, but feels very special.
Yeah, just having that information to begin with, because so many of us are so disconnected to our own history, so for you to kind of work around your family and actually find them on Google, I think is pretty outstanding. And it's a very fortunate position to be in. Like, I mean, if I look up my family, I don't really find much. So that's incredible.
Well, and to that, I'm like, well, I think that now, if I hadn't been able to find my family on, I mean, like I wasn't counting on it, but then I ended up being able to. And I was like, okay, well, I just want to like tell the alive, the family members who are alive want to tell their story, because at the very minimum, this is where it can start. And that's what I was kind of like, my backup plan was like, if I don't find anything here, then I will just like go straight to my mom and like go storycorps on her. You know, it's like, that's like, that was my
That's what I do
plan.
with my younger sister. I'm like, go to mom and ask her these questions that I can't ask her.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it.
I just want to add that I was listening to this webinar the other day. Of course, now that I'm going to have a baby, I'm into all like learning about parenting strategies and all that crap. And so I was on a webinar on raising multicultural children, and they were talking about how to address like racism with your kids, or how to kind of teach them how to navigate the world, especially with all the anti-Asian crimes that are going on lately, and how schools are going back slowly but surely in person now. So kids are going to be around each other again. And of course, there's what we see reflected in the news amongst adults is going to be reflected amongst the kids, and how to navigate those spaces. And they were really stressing the importance of instilling a sense of pride in their culture and knowing about their culture, like teaching them about their culture in the first place, because so many of us, like we've, been talking about here, are so starved for it. And, you are lucky to be able to Google your family and find out information about them. Not a lot of people can do that. And so that's, relating it back to my own experience. I think where I had joined this podcast, the Tifa Project, was I had recently lost my grandpa, and he was, the person that I, aside from my grandma, who I lost like over 10 years ago, they were really the two that I would always like try and milk for stories, or like say like, where do we come from? Show me pictures, take me there. And they would always be like, no, why?
Right.
Go be American. And I'd be like, no, like, I don't know why I need to know this stuff, but I do. Yeah. And so it really goes back to that, and feeling that kind of like resentment that I felt for him kind of leaving me without telling me any of that stuff. And then going through the process of realizing like, oh, this is not just about my learning, it's about his trauma also. And I couldn't, as much as I tried to, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't force that out of him. And it did take me having to learn on my own in order to have that pride to now be able to have these conversations that I was so desperate to find the language for. And so it's just a really special thing to go through. And again, another really like significant thing about Filipino culture and the whole idea of Kapwa, and being able to share this like interconnected identity with each other, where we can learn from each other and, again, develop the language to articulate ourselves in moments of like passive aggression or microaggressions and, all the stuff that we see going on in the world today, because whether or not we want to participate in it, we're literally being attacked with it. So we have to learn how to respond, and we have to learn the language that we need to address it and to pass on to our, future generations, whether it's our kids or just younger generations listening to this podcast. It's just something really important to know. And if you don't have that like personal, that opportunity to like connect with who you are at your core, then it's hard to feel that pride. And that's where the self-loathing comes in. That's where the desire to assimilate comes in, and so that's just not helpful for anyone. It doesn't honor you. It doesn't honor your family. It doesn't honor your ancestors. And, there's nothing wrong with wanting to participate in the world and go off and venture into whatever you feel your passion is. But if you don't feel like intrinsic connection, I guess, really grounded in your sense of self and who you are and why you do what you do, then it's going to be hard to sustain.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautifully said, Nani.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And Nani, what you were saying is inspiring me to say that, for anybody who's listening, with Kapwa, it's like, my success is your success. It's like, that's how we would celebrate one another's success or pride. And so I'm thinking like, I wonder for folks who are listening, if you are from, or if your family, part of your family is Kapampangan.
Yeah, my mom knows that dialect. I'm supposed to know it. I don't know it. So
it's the location. Sorry, I was saying the dialect.
Mm-hmm.
It's Pampanga. If any of your family, if you identify as being part Pampangan, then I want to let you know that is the origin of my grandfather and my grandmother. And so in that way, as a person who originates or is ethnically tied to Pampanga, then that is also your story in that way, but for what it's worth, if it helps.
Beautiful. I just love all this love we're sharing today. I'm going to gently kick out Nani because I know you have to go.
Sidebar, I do have to go because I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Me too.
Thank you so much.
Nani, I had no idea we had that Vallejo connection, and I just feel so much closer to you now.
I know, I don't rep that enough.
Yeah, well, Nani, before we go, feel free to say goodbye to the listeners, and then I'm going to continue my conversation with Cynthia.
Everyone, well, I do have to hop off for now, but I just want to say thank you again to Cynthia for joining us today. And thank you all for listening to this really deeply meaningful conversation that we're having. I hope that, it's some of what any of us or all three of us are saying is resonating with you. And if so, please text us and let us know at 415-484-8329. We'd love to hear from you and get your thoughts on this conversation. Anyway, gotta go. See you next time. Love y'all.
Love you, Nani. Talk to you later. We'll text later.
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right. So I have you to myself now. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Well, wow, Cynthia, I'm just so moved by our conversation today. I think it's the conversation I needed to hear, especially this week. And, just being reminded that we're not alone in our struggle and sort of that tug of war that we have inside, that inner battle of trying to balance being Filipino and American. Mm-hmm. And so obviously we've talked extensively about it for the majority of our conversation. I want to go ahead and fast forward to your life today and with everything that you've learned and experienced. I know for you are super proud that right now you have an entirely virtual private practice in LA. So tell us about that.
I do. So I am 100% virtual as Jen mentioned. And I'm just, I think there's a number of benefits that I've found with being able to do that. Like my clients can be wherever they are. And if they need to go out and run errands, and then they'll just kind of talk to me in their car.
I love that. You're so flexible with your clients.
It just really is, I think I find I need that. I need that kind of okay, can I take care of this? And can I take care of that? And I do think that there's value in us being able to carve out our time.
Yeah.
But I think there's something also valuable given the the societal context we're in that does move so freaking fast.
Yeah.
That people are, I find that folks are getting in the regular habit of in the middle of their day, taking a break and being nope, right now I'm in therapy, or right now I'm doing
Love that.
And checking in with myself. And I feel really good about it. I mean, it is something that I'm seeing with my clients, I've been chatting with my clients about okay, I'm probably I'm just going to continue with this virtual, seeing people virtually, and they're all pretty down. It really is I try to, make sure they can see me and see my gestures and everything. So there's at least some kind of body read, because that's what gets lost in the individual, in the individual sessions in person. But I think, I don't know, there's something also very special about getting to see people in their space.
Yeah.
Where they get to be comfortable in their space.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to see them kind of in their own environment and not in this this office setting that's that can be quite containing, but for some can be quite intimidating.
Yeah.
Because it's oh, I don't know where this is. This is a new place for me. And it looks very different than my home life.
Yeah. When I think about at the very start of the pandemic, my husband and I tried to go to couples counseling in person. Yeah. And it was a whole event. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just the whole act of like getting the family together. I mean, we had to talk to our therapist ahead of time if we could bring our dog, because our dog has separation anxiety. So there's that. So we're like, is this dog friendly? But yeah, just kind of like being in the therapist like territory in a sense, when the pandemic started, we switched our therapist and it was all telehealth, pretty much the entirety. Like I literally have not met our therapist in person this entire time. And I know she's down the street, like I know like the office is down the street.
Like you're so close, but
yeah. And like maybe it's because I haven't had too much in therapy sessions that I do like the telehealth. I do like, just being at the comfort of my home. Now I know that it would be helpful for, the therapist maybe see more of my mannerisms, but, other than that, it's been nice. Like, I feel like the therapist is meeting me where I'm at, and I've grown to like it. And it doesn't feel like an event. It just feels like, I can just go to a safe space in my house and have this conversation. So, in a way I feel fortunate that most of my therapy experience has been during the pandemic, because I don't really know much otherwise, other than the few times I did meet with our first one, where it was about meeting in person and making sure our dog doesn't like snore in the middle of our session.
You're like, so sorry. So sorry.
And so I think that's like so beautiful that, you've been able to become a virtually private practice. I'm curious, did you become that way because of the pandemic, or you were already built up that way?
So I had started my private practice when I first moved out to California from New York about 2015, I think is when I got licensed in New York. But like, I couldn't see anybody in California yet because I had to transfer my license over. Yeah. So at that point, my practice was entirely virtual. And I was like a part of like some of the platforms that we've got out there, like BetterHelp. And there was another one that I was like 3 cups. It was like 3 cups of tea or something.
Oh, 7 cups of tea?
7 cups of tea.
Oh my God. I love that platform. I love that platform.
I love that platform.
Okay, wait. Were you on like the therapist side of it?
Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Let me take a minute here. This is why I'm so glad we're having things scheduled afterward. I love that platform, by the way. And I've been an advocate for that platform since like, I think when I created my account, which was like November 2019 or something. Yeah. And I actually first had a paid therapist on there for myself. And then eventually I volunteered to be a listener. I got honors in my internship program by the way. And it's just been a great platform for people who maybe are too intimidated to do like verbal therapy. It's more of just chatting, and although like the chat itself is not therapy, I got to be clear on that, but like, especially if you're talking to volunteers, but that is so cool. You're like the first person I'm talking to, like been on the other side. Okay. Can you just tell me about
yes
for a little bit? Like, I'm obsessed right now. Like, our listeners are just going to have to listen to this. So I literally would talk about this sometimes as like ad commercials throughout the shows, be like, hey, check out 7 cups. Like, and it's great because it's like, as a member and as a volunteer, you can be completely anonymous. So you could be really transparent. So anyway, I need to hear your experience.
Yes. It was one of those things that I was like, okay, how do I serve still? I think that was like my real frustration at the time, was like, how do I still do this? So like I was on BetterHelp doing services for people who were in New York or based out of New York. Yeah. And I was focusing my work on like strong, independent women at the time, because I was thinking like, it was almost like what suited me at the time too, is like, I was away from the place where I would be working. And then I came across 7 cups of tea and I was like, oh, this is so lovely. And at first I became a listener, like a non-therapist listener. And that was, I think, before the therapist listening thing was an option. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, well, I can do this. And there was like a little bit of like a training component to it as well, which I really like appreciated, just as like a resource. And honestly, like I used it for both being a listener and being somebody who needed to talk. Yeah. Because when I got there, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me just try this. And it was free 24/7 chat. There were like, I remember there were like guides or something for like self-help and like just like growing paths. I remember them being called growing paths and thinking,
I think like growth.
Lovely.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. Growth paths. I'm going to log into my account right now as you're talking.
Oh yeah. And now, I mean, like they have grown, which is wonderful. I do remember when that moment where they shifted and they were like, if you are a therapist, if you are interested, please apply. And then I applied and I became one of the therapists for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I was doing that for a bit, but then I was thinking like, I really should like ground my roots here. Like I really wasn't embracing my life here.
Yeah. I hear you on that. Like, I was like, not being rooted.
Yeah. I'm like
I live here. I should probably grow roots out here.
I should probably grow roots. So I took jobs out here and like slowly but surely, like my practice, like kind of took a pause. Like I think at some point I was like down to like one client and I was working full time and I was like, okay, well, let me just take a break for a little bit after this client is done with their sessions.
Yeah.
That kind of took me, so 2015, 16 to 2019. So a few years later, when I ultimately needed to go take care of myself, I experienced a really severe bout of depression that resulted in me needing to go to the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
It was such a bizarre experience because at that point I had been in the field for like 13 years.
Yeah.
And part of what makes me so passionate about the work that I do is like, and at that point I knew like how to help somebody else get to the hospital. Like I had helped dozens and dozens of other people go to the hospital for safety.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like, okay, I'm like thinking through all the assessment questions. Like, do you are you having thoughts of dying by suicide? Are you having it was like,
you were like assessing yourself.
I was assessing myself.
Wow.
And like, as a person who struggled with depression for most of my life, like suicidality is like not a thing I'm unfamiliar with. Mm-hmm. But what freaked me out that time was like, when I got around to asking the last question of like, can I keep myself safe? I like couldn't say like, yes, like I usually can.
Wow.
And so that freaked me out. And I was like, oh, I just know if I were the clinician listening to someone saying what I'm saying right now, I need to go.
Wow.
And so ultimately got to the hospital. It was the right decision. There was just too many things. And I think what it ended up being for me was like a place where I went to kind of we were talking about that healthy separation from something that's kind of unhealthy for you.
Yeah.
It ended up being that for me. It was like when I got to the hospital, it was like I didn't have to worry about all of these, like the 60-hour work week I had built for myself, the program I was running on the weekend. Like I just had an opportunity to be like, okay, what's going on with me? Like, how did I end up in this situation? What's going on? And really doing an internal check. And I think it was like, I think that our bodies like tell us like what we need to do. I just at that point don't think I was listening very well. Right. So I think that was like kind of the hard stop that my body was like, no, you're going to be scared out of your mind because we're going to think this. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to, force you to go take a break somewhere else. And it was life changing. I'm of course, I'm no longer working that 60 something hour work week. I'm working more like a 25-hour work week.
Oh, I love it. I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And, and the pace that I'm moving at is just not that, I've been learning more about like colonial mentality from Dr. David's book and just like the work that he's done around that. And recently became aware of like just how much that hustle is tied back to that colonial mentality that we've all inherited as Filipino Americans. And, or not all, some of us.
Many of us, a number of us. Yeah.
And
we don't have the stats on it. So we're going to say generally speaking.
Generally speaking, this can be a thing. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that is connected to that. And that like, it would be really, me tying myself back to my revolutionary grandparents. I'm like, it would be really revolutionary if I just rest.
Wow.
if I just like slow the F down. It's like, it's an interesting switch, and one that feels not entirely foreign, but like just not usual. So I think we got here by talking about 7 cups of tea. So
yeah.
Not sure how that all, but thank you.
That's why I love this show, because we just kind of see where the conversation organically goes, and I'm here for all of it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I love what you said. I wrote it down. Just, it would be very revolutionary if you just rest, and, talking to you, actually, I want to give a shout out to my friend, Tiffany Rivera, who I've known since high school. We interviewed her on our show back in episode 88, which was, way back in actually beginning of the year, January 15th. And I bring her up because you reminded me of much of what she talked about when she was highly involved in mental health in college. And eventually she knew that she had all the symptoms where she needed to check herself in, to a clinic, and I think it's incredible how you had this, professional background and experience to even have that conversation with yourself to be like, okay, I got to check myself in. I just think that's astounding. And if there's any benefit to being in the mental health field, it's like, it's always knowing that you can sort of do those check-ins with yourself, the tools to be like, okay, I am not in a good place. I'm not
doing well,
And I just think that's incredible. And Tiffany was the only other person other than you that brought that up as well. Like, oh, like I noticed I hit all these checkpoints. I should probably check myself in somewhere.
Nice. Good work, Tiffany.
Yeah. Shout out to Tiff. Yeah. And I just appreciate this entire conversation. Hence why, not that I ever had a timer on this conversation, but it's like why I'm dragging it out for as long as I could, because, and I think this is a good way to transition into our life lesson for today, Cynthia. It's really the importance of mental health. It's like, I think about when I was first diagnosed with mild depression, and it was a couple years ago, and I was in complete denial of it. I was all like, no, I don't always have like a dark cloud over my head. Like I'm not always just generally depressed. And then when I started to see the symptoms, I realized I've had it since I lost my dad when I was 10. So I've had it for a very long time. I remember looking back at all the times where like evenings are typically the times I'm the most depressed. Winter time is when I have seasonal depression because my birthday is in December. My dad's birthday is 4 days after mine, like just thinking about like all, like just kind of feeling all that and recognizing that, and then being able to be a student of my depression rather than let it, rule over me. It's like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to work through this. And part of why I'm so adamant with doing podcasting is because what I've learned, there's a really good book I really like. I always talk about it. It's called The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb. And there's a chapter in that book. And I literally always mention this whenever I bring up something like this, but there's a section in there that says part of working through your depression or working with your depression is to be in community with people. And so even just knowing that knowing that every Saturday, Nani and I are going to get together and talk about something despite how depressed I am. It's like, okay, I got to show up. And I find that being in community with people is just a healing experience in itself. That actually kind of goes back to a paper that Nani and I are working on, where we're kind of talking about our podcast show has kind of become this place for community healing and just continuing to celebrate that, So anyway, I guess I'm like just talking out loud right now, but yeah, kind of going back to you and really just stressing the importance of mental health. I like how you say that mental health is just as important as physical health, and we need to do both in order to thrive. So tell us a little bit more about that for our listeners to understand, because maybe there are still some people who don't make that connection. They think, oh, no, as long as I can minimize it because no one can see it, I can hide it. Although it does show up in your physical health. So go ahead.
It sure does.
Yeah.
So, and for anybody who's kind of on the fence about like that connection between the two, if you can think of a time where you were either scared or anxious, and if you can think about the tension that started to develop in your body, like the shoulders tightening, like maybe coming up closer to the ears, or your neck hurt, or you got a headache, that's that idea of how connected those our minds and our bodies are. And I think there's something you were sharing just now about like how to deal, and I need to look up that book for sure. Yeah, thank you. What you were saying about like being in community with other people. Yeah. It's so interesting because when you're in community with other people, you're physically or virtually in this instance, like with another person, you see them, you kind of feel their or hear their voice, you kind of see their like mannerisms, that kind of stuff. And that's all physical. But there is something of a process that's going on in your brain. And here's where I'm going to get a little neuropsych nerdy is just, there is, that fight or flight response when we get scared, when we get anxious, that thing that makes us go, oh God, like this thing is happening. When we are with other people, we can co-regulate together. And there's something, if we think evolutionarily, like when we were being chased by a lion and we ran to our village of people, the signals to our brain that we were safe was that we were surrounded by people. We were laughing, we were engaging with one another, being together. That's not something that you tend to do when you're on, in pursuit, is like you're not doing that. And so, I think one of the part of the nervous system that you're actually activating when you're with other people and getting to connect and kind of relax into that space is that what you're doing is activating a part of the polyvagal nervous system. And that part is called the ventral vagal nervous system. And it's responsible for us to like calm and feel just at ease. And it's so intuitive, I think. But there's the bit of science behind it, is like there is a physiological process happening that does then kind of put our minds at ease. We're no longer like under threat, or we no longer feel like we're trying to survive, when we are together.
Yeah. So there you have it, listeners. We're better together.
We sure are. We really are.
I think all of this is to just say like, mental health is important. Being in community is important. Trying to find that balance between being in community as well as setting those healthy boundaries. And again, it's an ongoing conversation, but I think we've talked about it extensively, and we hope that you, the listener, can really figure out what that means for you. Cynthia, obviously, we have covered a lot in our conversation today, so I just want to make sure I've covered all my bases here because Nani's not here, so I can do. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that she wouldn't let me do this, but no, I'm just saying. Before we wrap up, I think this calls for a great conversation, and I'm happy that it's going at the length that it is, because with our show now that we're just doing interviews every other week, I think that also calls for longer conversations with the guests that we do have. So with that said, is there anything else that you want to make sure our listeners know before we go?
Yeah. I kind of connected to the experience I was sharing with you all about my own knowing I needed to go to the hospital, that kind of stuff. I really appreciated kind of in reflection of that period of time, like, my God, that was so hard. Like that was indeed probably one of the hardest times in my life. And I had the resources, I had the tools, I had, the background and training, the knowledge. Yeah. And it was still really, really hard. And I think one of the things that it had me realize was like, oh God, like there's like sometimes just no education that gets to happen around mental health or emotional health. And so I really want to offer myself to whoever's out there listening. If you have questions about like mental health, if you have questions about how do I look for somebody, if you have questions about any of that, please contact me. I'm really here. Even if I don't get to work with you myself, I will be, a support person in your life to make sure you do get that. Because I do think that you're worth it. You're worth getting that time. So
you're worth it. You're enough. I was reading a book recently that just straight up said, human beings are logical and emotional. And despite how much despite your credibility, despite your background, despite your experience, you're still an emotional human being, and processing your emotions, working through your emotions is still hard. And so don't shame yourself when you think so much about a certain thing, but you still can't work through it, because we are human. We are not perfect. I remember having a conversation about that with a friend too. It's like, her and her husband have master's degrees and they're communicators by trade. And yet, they were still struggling with their mental health and their relationship. And that is okay. That's okay, because we're human. And so I think that is kind of a great way to summarize our conversation, is like, you may know a lot, but you can never underestimate like that moment when like you're really feeling emotional and you literally don't know what to do. You don't know where to turn to. And I think in this situation, if you're listening to this and you feel really compelled, please reach out to Cynthia. I mean, she is on Instagram, Living Fully IG, and also her website, IamLivingFully.com. But Cynthia, this is great.
Yeah, so great, Jen.
Great conversation. I'm so glad we had this.
I'm so glad too. And, I do have to say something. It's just, I said it at the beginning. I really appreciate that you are, that public figure, a public figure in our world that is just, being human. Part of why I do the speaking sometimes that I'll do is just because I didn't get to have that as a young person. And, and just to acknowledge you for being that person for so many people. I think I just want to thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. I mean, I was like journaling about this the other day, and this is when I was like having a depressive mode. I was all like, my podcasting is an outcry for attention to my dad that I lost when I was so young. I mean, there's always, I mean, a lot of us, I think when we're really good at something, it's because we're trying to compensate for something else from our childhood. That's sort of like my theory. And, having lost my dad and also just with feeling silence, just like with, I'm sure many of us in our families growing up or being neglected emotionally, that shows up in our adult life one way or the other. And, thanks to all of the therapy I got and support I got and the communities I've been able to engage in, and above all else, podcasting, because that's really been my way of community throughout this pandemic. I'm grateful. And I've learned that there's a phrase, I don't know, maybe you can help me with this. It goes something like evil doesn't survive in the light or something like that, or like sin, like something. I'm going to totally butcher it. But basically what I come to find is that like keeping things in is a form of self-sabotage. And you think you're doing other people a favor by keeping it in, but you actually cause a ripple effect to your loved ones. You make people feel uncomfortable. They don't know how to approach you, how to help you. And also you model to them that their feelings don't matter either. And therefore they need to internalize it too. And so, one thing I discovered in this project is like, the more unapologetic I show up, it gives other people permission. So if I can do the opposite of what I was taught growing up, I find that it's able to, solve a lot of, mental health issues, I think, within our own community. Now, obviously, I'm not the hero here. I'm not going to save everyone, but I do appreciate you saying that, because this didn't come on accident. Like this has been like a lifelong work for myself to be who I am, to have these conversations, and to know that, like, to not be afraid of sharing when I really am going through a depressive episode, because we talked about this offline, the first quarter of this year, I was just going through a crazy depression. Like I had anxiety in my chest, and I would literally just like work for hours just because I could, because either I was like, oh no, I can rechannel that depression into my work, I can numb it out by working, new project, I'll take it. Like I will work on the weekends. And
I know that life.
Good thing is that, I know. Right. And the good thing is that at the end of March, and this is a story for another time, when I finally hit a tipping point and just shut off my phone for an entire week, I've been able to slow down, Cynthia, and just be more present and okay, and to sit with my feelings. And, thank God for therapy. I do have a couples counselor as well as a therapist for myself. And I'm just happy talking about it, because I'm happy because of it. You know what I mean? Like I'm going through it. And so, if we can look at our mental health, like our physical health, like how we would get a personal trainer to tone ourselves, like to know that it's okay to ask for that kind of help. And I know at this point, we're probably like beating a dead horse, but like until it is really normalized, I will continue to beat that dead horse.
Great. Good.
That's figuratively speaking, y'all. You know what I mean? So so thank you for saying that. That truly means a lot. And I needed to acknowledge what you said and share with our listeners, like why it's so important to me, because just like with many of us, we didn't have that opportunity growing up. We didn't have that space. And, with every listener, every email that we get from people, every feedback we get, it affirms, our responsibility or sense of responsibility to show up on the show and be unapologetic and showing up as ourselves. And also just continuing to step out of our own comfort zone to be more bold, at least with Nani and I, and sharing our stories, because even we still have stuff that we need to
but, something I wanted to, what you're saying to me reminds me of something that Ate Allison Kubales.
Yeah. We've interviewed her too. Keep talking. I'm going to give her a shout out as we talk.
Yeah. She was doing a clubhouse room. Have you heard of this thing?
Oh, Clubhouse. Yeah. Everyone wants me to be on it. I'm like, no.
Yeah. It's a place. It's its own place.
Yeah.
But she said something in a group that I was in with her. It was a room that was called Pinays. So after her work, but she said that if you're doing anything for the community, whether that's, the Filipino community, or I think she was speaking specifically for the Filipino community because that's who was in the room. Right. But in general, if you are doing work for your community, one of the things that you were saying reminded me of what she said, which is whatever you do, it's like it heals you as it heals other people.
Yep.
And so I really appreciated that bit of wisdom. It's something I've been carrying as I'm working on Kapwa therapy, is just when I get to that edgy place of I need to grow, I need to read and write. And then I'm like, okay, what did Ate Allison say? Okay. It's okay.
That reminds me of my husband, and lately he's been taking care of his physical health. He's shed a lot of weight in the recent weeks. And, but before, so just a quick story, I guess, before we wrap up, for some time he kept telling himself I'm going to work out for you. I'm going to look better for you. And I said to him, I was all like, I want you to do it for you because it'll benefit you and it'll benefit me, it's rather than do it for me, do it for you. It will benefit me, And so I think kind of what you're saying is when you heal, you allow other people to heal, or you heal with other people as well. But it starts with your own desire to heal, because like I mentioned before, it causes a ripple effect. If you heal, someone else is going to heal. They say healed, hurt people, but also healed people, heal people, empowered people, empower people. And so be the change, y'all. Your work. And a quick shout out to Ate Allison, episode 75, released October 23rd, 2020. Check her out. She created the concept of Pinayism, I believe, and she's just amazing, inspirational in so many levels. So once again, that's episode 25 at thetifaproject.com. Cynthia, obviously I have taken up a lot of your time. So
my pleasure.
Closing thoughts before we go. I feel like we did a lot, but I always want to make sure that we've covered everything.
I think we did. We did. This has been fun.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, this is going to be a fun episode for everyone when this comes out, because they'll be like, wow, this is a longer than normal episodes. Yeah, because I do know that the episode that's going to come out before this is going to be fairly short. So I think they'll appreciate this long episode.
You're
all right, well, let me go ahead and wrap up here. Cynthia, again, thank you so much for being on our show. Remember, to our listeners, you can check out Cynthia at her website, which is iamlivingfully.com, or reach out to her on Instagram, livingfullyig. Cynthia, any other ways you want people to get a hold of you other than those two contact information?
Sometimes I'll host a support group on Clubhouse if you're there, and you could just find me with my full name, Cynthia Siadat, and Perfect. Cynthia's Cynthia, Siadat, Siadat. So
I like how you sort of thought, you're like, how do I spell my name again?
Yeah. I was like, wait, I know what am I spelling? Okay, I'm gonna do it.
It's when I spell my middle name, it's because it's my mom's maiden name. It's really long. I'm like, I really think about it. But awesome. Cynthia, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I know that Nani would have been a part of this conversation and she would have enjoyed it. And to our listeners, again, if you want to reach out to us, our phone number is 415-484-8329. Obviously, we have our website as well, tfawproject.com. And other than that, thank you all so much for being here. We love you all, and we can't wait to speak with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.
Bye.